You know that moment when your boyfriend laughs when you catch him cheating, and you think your world is ending, but then later you're the one crying laughing as you reveal it to his whole family? Yeah, that was me 3 months ago, and holy shit, do I have a story for you. Let me paint you a picture of how spectacularly my life imploded on a Tuesday afternoon. Not a Monday, because that would have been too cliché, but a fucking Tuesday, when I was supposed to be at my marketing job pretending to care about conversion rates and customer acquisition costs. Instead, I was driving home early because I'd gotten food poisoning from the sketchy sushi place near my office. My stomach was doing backflips, and all I wanted was to curl up in bed with my heating pad and binge-watch something mindless. Simple plan, right? Wrong. The first red flag should have been Jake's car in the driveway at 2 p.m. on a weekday. Jake, my boyfriend of 2 years, who worked construction and was supposedly putting in overtime on some downtown project. Jake, who'd been increasingly distant lately, always checking his phone and making excuses about why he couldn't spend time with me. But my brain, still foggy from whatever bacterial warfare was happening in my digestive system, just figured he'd gotten off early too. Maybe we could be sick and miserable together. How romantic, right? I fumbled with my keys at the front door, my hands shaking slightly from the nausea. The house was quiet except for some weird thumping sound coming from upstairs. My first thought was that Jake was probably moving furniture around. He'd been talking about rearranging the bedroom for weeks. The thumping got more rhythmic as I climbed the stairs, more urgent, more familiar. And that's when my brain, despite being poisoned by questionable raw fish, finally connected the fucking dots. My hand froze on the bedroom doorknob. Part of me wanted to turn around, walk back down those stairs, get in my car, and pretend I'd never come home early. Pretend I was still the blissfully ignorant girlfriend who thought her biggest problem was expired sushi. But the other part of me, the part that had been sensing something was off for months, needed to know. I turned the handle, and there was Jake. My Jake. The guy who still used 3-in-1 shampoo and thought vegetables were optional. The guy I'd been planning a future with, discussing moving in together permanently, maybe getting a dog. He was tangled up in my sheets, our sheets, with someone I recognized immediately. Melissa from his construction crew, the one he'd mentioned in passing, always quick to change the subject when I asked questions. Blonde, tan, everything I wasn't with my pale skin and dark hair. They were so caught up in their little performance that they didn't even notice me standing there. I watched for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, my brain struggling to process what my eyes were seeing. The betrayal hit me in waves. First, the visual confirmation that my worst fears were reality. Then the realization that this wasn't some spontaneous mistake. They were way too comfortable, too familiar with each other's bodies. This had been going on for a while. But the thing that really fucking broke me? Jake looked happy. Genuinely, purely happy in a way I hadn't seen him look in months. The way he used to look at me. I must have made some sound, a gasp, maybe a whimper, because suddenly they both turned toward the door. Melissa scrambled to cover herself, her face flushing red with embarrassment and panic. She started babbling something about how sorry she was, how it wasn't supposed to happen like this, how I wasn't supposed to find out this way. But Jake looked me dead in the eye and fucking laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not an uncomfortable, caught red-handed laugh. A genuine, amused chuckle like I was the punchline to some joke I wasn't in on. He sat up in bed, completely naked and completely unashamed, and said something about how he figured I'd find out eventually anyway. His tone was so casual, so dismissive, like he was commenting on the weather instead of destroying everything we'd built together. The room started spinning, and not just from the food poisoning. My chest felt tight, like someone was squeezing my lungs with their bare hands. My vision went a little blurry around the edges, and I had to grip the doorframe to keep from falling over. Melissa was still talking, still trying to explain or apologize or something, but her voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. All I could focus on was Jake's face, that smug expression that made it clear he thought this whole situation was amusing rather than devastating. That's when something inside me snapped. Not broke, snapped. Like a rubber band stretched too far, suddenly released with violent force. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything or demand explanations or beg him to choose me over her. Instead, I felt this strange, cold calm wash over me. My vision cleared. The spinning stopped, and suddenly I could think with crystal clarity despite the chaos in my stomach and my heart. I looked at Jake, really looked at him, and realized I was seeing him for the first time. Not the man I thought I loved, not the future I'd been building in my head, but exactly who he was. Someone who could betray me and then laugh about it to my face. Someone who was about to learn that underestimating me was the biggest mistake of his life. I didn't say a word. Just turned around and walked back downstairs, leaving them to figure out what to do with their guilty consciences and tangled limbs. My hands were steady now as I grabbed my purse and keys. The nausea was still there, but it was background noise compared to the sharp, focused rage building in my chest. As I sat in my car in the driveway, watching Melissa sneak out the back door like the coward she was, I started making mental notes. Jake's family barbecue was this weekend. His parents, his siblings, his aunts and uncles, his cousins, all the people who thought he was such a stand-up guy, such a devoted boyfriend, all the people who had no idea what kind of man they'd raised and celebrated. The planning started that very moment, sitting in my driveway while my cheating ex-boyfriend was probably upstairs trying to figure out damage control. My phone buzzed with a text from him, probably some bullshit explanation or half-assed apology, but I didn't even look at it. I had work to do. Because Jake thought my pain was funny? He thought catching him cheating was some kind of joke. Well, I was about to show him exactly how hilarious betrayal could be when the tables were completely fucking turned. The drive to my sister's apartment was a blur of red lights and racing thoughts. Every detail of the last few months was suddenly crystal clear. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the way he'd pull away when I tried to be affectionate. All those times I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid or insecure. My sister Sarah took one look at my face when she opened the door and immediately pulled me inside. She didn't ask questions, just made tea and waited for me to find my words. When I finally told her what happened, she went through the same progression I had: shock, heartbreak, and then pure, righteous fury. Sarah had never been Jake's biggest fan anyway. She always said something seemed off about him, that he was too charming, too smooth. Turns out big sister's intuition is a real thing. But when I started talking about the family barbecue, about my plans for revenge, Sarah got this worried look on her face. She started talking about taking the high road, about how revenge would only make me feel worse in the long run, about how I should focus on healing instead of plotting. Sweet Sarah, always trying to be the voice of reason. But she hadn't seen Jake's face when he laughed. She hadn't felt that particular brand of humiliation, the kind that comes from realizing someone you love thinks your pain is entertainment. No, the high road was for people who hadn't been laughed at while discovering their life was a lie. I was taking the scenic route through hell, and I was going to enjoy every fucking mile. The next few days were a masterclass in strategic thinking disguised as grief processing. Jake kept texting me, calling, showing up at my apartment with flowers and bullshit explanations. Each attempt at contact just added fuel to the fire burning in my chest. He'd switched from his casual amusement to full-blown panic mode once he realized I wasn't going to fall for his usual charm offensive. His messages started simple: "We need to talk," then escalated to desperate: "Please don't do anything crazy, I can explain everything." The fucking audacity of this man, acting like I was the unstable one in this situation, like I was the one who destroyed everything we'd built together. But his desperation told me something important. He was scared. And if Jake was scared, it meant he understood there were consequences coming. I ignored every single attempt at communication. Radio silence is a beautiful thing when you're dealing with someone who's used to getting their way. It forces them to sit with their own anxiety, to imagine all the ways their world might come crashing down. Meanwhile, I was busy turning that imagination into reality. The planning phase required a level of patience I didn't know I possessed. Every fiber of my being wanted immediate gratification, wanted to burn his life down right fucking now. But the best revenge is methodical revenge. It's precise, calculated, and absolutely devastating when executed properly. So I channeled all that rage into research and strategy. First, I needed intelligence. Jake's family barbecue happened every month at his parents' house, a big, chaotic affair with at least 30 people. His mom, Patricia, was one of those women who lived for family gatherings. She'd spend weeks planning the menu, decorating the backyard, making sure everyone felt included and loved. She genuinely believed her family was perfect, that Jake was her golden child who could do no wrong. I'd been to probably 15 of these barbecues over the past 2 years. Always introduced as Jake's girlfriend, always treated like I was already part of the family. His mom would pull me aside to talk about wedding venues and baby names, making it clear she expected me to become her daughter-in-law eventually. His dad would make dad jokes and ask about my job, treating me with the kind of respect reserved for someone he thought would be around forever. The guilt about what I was planning to do to these genuinely nice people tried to creep in during quiet moments. They didn't deserve to have their family gathering turned into a battlefield. But then I'd remember Jake's laugh, that dismissive chuckle that made it clear he thought I was disposable, and the guilt would evaporate. Patricia and the rest of them deserved to know who Jake really was. I was just the messenger. The second part of my intelligence gathering involved social media stalking. Not just Jake's accounts, I already knew he was smart enough to keep his affair off Instagram, but Melissa's. And holy shit, did Melissa not understand the concept of discretion? Her Facebook was a treasure trove of barely concealed hints about her secret relationship. Photos of expensive dinners with captions like, "Someone special is spoiling me tonight," posted on days when Jake had told me he was working late. Pictures of her wearing jewelry I'd never seen before, stuff that was way too expensive for someone on a construction worker's salary. But the real goldmine was her check-ins. This woman had been posting her location constantly, and when I cross-referenced the dates and places with Jake's supposed work schedule, a clear pattern emerged. They'd been meeting up at least twice a week for the past 3 months. Hotels, restaurants, even a weekend trip to the coast that Jake had told me was a work conference. Each piece of evidence felt like a small victory, validation that I wasn't crazy or paranoid. The affair wasn't some recent development or moment of weakness. It was a sustained betrayal that required planning and lying on Jake's part. He'd been living a double life, maintaining our relationship while building something with her. The level of deception was almost impressive in its thoroughness, but evidence was only part of the equation. I needed the perfect delivery method, something that would maximize impact while minimizing my own exposure to drama. The family barbecue was ideal because it guaranteed an audience, but I had to be smart about timing and presentation. Too early in the event and people might leave before the full impact hit. Too late and people might be too drunk or tired to properly process what they were seeing. I spent hours lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, playing out different scenarios in my head. Each version had variables: how much to reveal, when to reveal it, whether to confront Jake directly or let the evidence speak for itself. The key was finding the approach that would give me the most satisfaction while ensuring Jake faced real consequences for his actions. That's when I remembered the family slideshow. Every barbecue, without fail, Patricia would set up a projector in the backyard after dinner. She'd show photos from recent family events, vacations, graduations, anything worth celebrating. It was her favorite part of the whole evening, getting everyone together to reminisce and share memories. She'd spend days beforehand organizing photos, creating a presentation that told the story of their family's adventures since the last gathering. The slideshow was perfect. Captive audience, emotional context, and Patricia always asked family members to contribute photos from their own cameras and phones. She'd been asking me to send pictures for months, wanting to include shots of Jake and me together as proof that I was already part of the family fabric. This time, I'd be more than happy to contribute to the family photo collection. The technical aspects were surprisingly simple. Patricia always used the same laptop for these presentations, and she'd given me the password months ago when she wanted me to help her organize photos from Jake's cousin's wedding. I could easily access the presentation file and add my own contributions to the digital photo album. But what photos to include? That required more strategic thinking. Too explicit and I'd come across as vindictive and cruel. Too subtle and the impact would be lost. I needed something that would be immediately recognizable as Jake, while being undeniably intimate with someone who wasn't me. Something that would make Patricia gasp and Jake's father's face turn red with embarrassment and anger. Melissa's social media provided the perfect solution. She'd posted a selfie from 3 weeks ago, just her face and shoulder, but you could clearly see a man's arm around her, and on his wrist was the watch I'd given Jake for his birthday last year. A custom engraving on the back that said, "Forever yours, A. Amanda." My name literally engraved on the watch that was wrapped around another woman in an intimate photo. The irony was so perfect it almost felt scripted. But one photo wouldn't be enough. I needed a sequence, a narrative that would unfold over the course of the slideshow. Something that would start with confusion, build to recognition, and end with undeniable truth. Melissa had provided plenty of material: check-ins at restaurants where she was clearly on dates, photos from the weekend trip Jake had lied about, even a picture of them at a local bar where you could see his distinctive tattoo on his forearm. The planning became almost meditative. Every evening after work, I'd sit at my computer, carefully curating the perfect sequence of revelations. I thought about pacing, about emotional impact, about the exact moment when Patricia would realize her golden child was a lying piece of shit. The control I felt during this process was intoxicating after days of feeling powerless and betrayed. Jake's increasingly frantic attempts to contact me only made the planning more satisfying. He'd started showing up at my workplace, cornering my coworkers to ask if I was okay, if I'd said anything about him. My friend Lisa from accounting told me he'd seemed genuinely worried about my mental state, which made me laugh out loud in my cubicle. Mental state? My mental state was fucking excellent. Focused, determined, and absolutely crystal clear about what needed to happen. The really beautiful part was how Jake's own desperation was probably making him look guilty to everyone around him. People who hadn't known anything was wrong were suddenly seeing him act strange and panicked. His own behavior was laying the groundwork for the revelation I was planning. 3 days before the barbecue, I got a text from Patricia asking if I was still planning to attend. Jake had apparently told the family that we were going through a rough patch, and he wasn't sure if I'd be comfortable coming to family events. The manipulation was subtle but clear. He was trying to isolate me from his family before I could do any damage to his reputation. I texted her back immediately. Wouldn't miss it for the world. I've been looking forward to sharing some special photos with everyone. The double meaning of that message gave me chills of anticipation. Patricia responded with heart emojis and excitement about seeing the pictures. She had no idea she was enthusiastically anticipating the destruction of her family's perception of her son. The innocence in her response made me feel a momentary pang of something. Guilt, maybe, or sadness that I was about to shatter her illusions about Jake. But then I thought about how many times she'd pulled me aside to talk about my future with Jake, how many conversations we'd had about grandchildren and holiday traditions. She'd been planning a future that included me, treating me like I was already her daughter-in-law, while her son was busy fucking someone else and laughing about my pain. Patricia deserved to know the truth. They all did. The night before the barbecue, I couldn't sleep. Not from anxiety, but from excitement. The kind of electric anticipation you feel before a big performance or important presentation. I'd rehearsed this moment in my head hundreds of times, considered every possible reaction, every potential outcome. I felt prepared for anything Jake might try to pull, any attempt he might make to spin the situation or make me look like the crazy ex-girlfriend. I laid out my outfit carefully, something that struck the right balance between grieving girlfriend seeking closure and woman who has her shit together. I needed to look sympathetic enough that the family would rally around me when the truth came out, but put together enough that no one would question my credibility or mental state. My phone sat silent on the nightstand. No more desperate texts from Jake, no more attempts at damage control. Either he'd given up trying to reach me, or he was planning his own strategy for the barbecue. Part of me hoped he'd try to get ahead of the situation, tell his family some version of the truth before I could reveal it. That would actually make my revenge even sweeter. I'd get to watch him spin whatever lies he thought would minimize the damage, and then systematically destroy his narrative with photographic evidence. But knowing Jake, he was probably planning to charm his way through the evening, play the concerned boyfriend worried about his girlfriend's strange behavior. He'd probably been telling everyone that I was acting irrational, maybe even hint that I was making things up or overreacting to some minor issue. Classic gaslighting technique: make the victim look unstable so no one believes them when they tell the truth. The beautiful thing about photographic evidence is that it doesn't care about charm or manipulation. Pictures don't lie. Don't embellish. Don't let emotions color the narrative. They just show exactly what happened, when it happened, and who was involved. Jake could spin whatever story he wanted, but he couldn't argue with timestamps and GPS data and his own fucking watch clearly visible in intimate photos with another woman. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I was smiling. Tomorrow was going to be a very interesting day for the whole family. Jake thought my pain was amusing. He thought catching him cheating was somehow funny. Well, tomorrow he'd learn that I had a pretty fucking excellent sense of humor, too. The morning of the barbecue, I woke up feeling like a gladiator preparing for battle. Every nerve in my body was buzzing with anticipation, that electric feeling you get before something life-changing is about to happen. I'd slept better than I had in weeks, probably because my subconscious knew that today was the day I'd finally get justice for Jake's casual cruelty. I took my time getting ready, savoring each step of the preparation. The shower felt like a cleansing ritual, washing away the last traces of the woman who'd been blindly in love with a man who'd laughed at her pain. The clothes I'd chosen looked perfect, a sundress that Patricia had complimented before, paired with sandals that Jake had bought me for our 6-month anniversary. I wanted to look like the sweet, innocent girlfriend everyone expected to see, right up until the moment I revealed what her precious son had been up to. My phone had one message from Patricia, sent early that morning, asking if I could bring my camera to capture some candid moments during the day. The irony was so perfect it felt like the universe was personally invested in my revenge plot. She wanted me to document the family gathering that would end up documenting her son's betrayal instead. The drive to their house was surreal. I'd made this trip dozens of times before, always excited to spend time with Jake's family, always looking forward to being included in their warm, chaotic gatherings. Today, I was driving toward the complete destruction of those relationships, armed with a laptop bag containing enough evidence to shatter every assumption they had about their golden boy. Jake's car was already in the driveway when I arrived, parked in his usual spot next to his dad's truck. The sight of it made my stomach clench, not with nerves but with anticipation. He was probably inside right now, playing the role of devoted son and helpful family member, completely unaware that his entire world was about to implode in front of everyone he cared about. Patricia opened the door before I could even knock, pulling me into one of her signature bear hugs that smelled like vanilla perfume and backyard barbecue smoke. Her genuine happiness at seeing me made my chest tight with an emotion I couldn't quite name. This woman had treated me like family for 2 years, and in about 3 hours I was going to break her heart by showing her who her son really was. She immediately started talking about the day's schedule, how excited she was about the slideshow, how she'd been organizing photos all week and couldn't wait to see what I'd contributed. Her enthusiasm was infectious and heartbreaking at the same time. Patricia lived for these family moments, genuinely believed that gathering everyone together was the most important thing she could do with her time. The backyard was already bustling with familiar faces. Jake's aunts were setting up folding chairs while his cousins chased each other around the pool. His dad was manning the grill, beer in one hand and spatula in the other, holding court with a group of uncles who were probably getting early afternoon drunk and telling the same stories they told at every gathering. And there was Jake, right in the middle of it all, playing cornhole with his teenage nephew and looking completely relaxed. When he saw me, his entire body tensed like someone had just walked over his grave. The color drained from his face, and he missed his next throw by about 3 feet. His nephew made some joke about him being off his game, but Jake was staring at me like I was a ghost who'd come back to haunt him, which I guess I kind of was. I gave him a small wave, the kind of polite acknowledgement you'd give to any acquaintance at a social gathering. His relief was visible from across the yard. He probably thought I was going to play nice, pretend nothing had happened, maybe even give him a chance to spin whatever story he'd prepared about our relationship troubles. Poor, stupid Jake. He had no idea what was coming. The next few hours were a masterclass in acting. I chatted with his aunts about work and travel plans. I helped Patricia in the kitchen, arranging potato salad and coleslaw in serving bowls while she told me about her neighbor's drama and asked about my sister's new job. I played with the kids in the pool, laughing at their jokes and judging their diving contests. To anyone watching, I was just Amanda, Jake's girlfriend, being her usual friendly self at another family barbecue. But I was also conducting surveillance. Every conversation, every interaction, every moment was being cataloged in my mind. I watched Jake trying to act normal while clearly fighting panic attacks every time he looked in my direction. I studied the family dynamics, noting who respected Jake the most, who would be most shocked by the revelation, who might try to defend him or make excuses. His mom was obviously his biggest fan, but his dad had always struck me as someone with traditional values who wouldn't tolerate infidelity. His older sister Rebecca had been through a messy divorce because of her ex-husband's cheating, so she'd probably have strong opinions about Jake's behavior. His younger cousins looked up to him like he was some kind of role model, always asking for advice about girls and jobs and life in general. They were all about to learn that their hero was just another lying piece of shit who thought other people's feelings were entertainment. Around 4 o'clock, Jake finally worked up the courage to approach me. He caught me alone by the dessert table, pretending to debate between Patricia's famous chocolate cake and her equally famous apple pie. His attempt at casual conversation was painful to watch. He kept stumbling over words, sweating despite the mild temperature, and glancing around like he expected me to start screaming at any moment. He wanted to talk privately, suggested we take a walk around the block so we could discuss things away from his family. The desperation in his voice was music to my fucking ears. He knew something was coming but had no idea what, and the uncertainty was eating him alive. I told him we could talk later, that I didn't want to miss any of the family time since I'd been looking forward to this barbecue all week. The lie came so easily it surprised me. But then again, I'd learned from a master manipulator. Jake had been lying to my face for months, making plans with me while secretly building a relationship with someone else. If he could lie about loving me while fucking another woman, I could certainly lie about wanting to work things out while planning to destroy his reputation. His relief at my reasonable response was almost comical. He actually relaxed visibly, probably thinking he'd gotten through the worst part and could now focus on damage control and sweet-talking his way back into my good graces. He even had the audacity to touch my arm affectionately, that same gesture he'd used hundreds of times before when he wanted to reassure me or make me feel loved. This time it took every ounce of self-control I had not to recoil in disgust. As the afternoon wore on, more family members arrived for dinner. The crowd grew to about 30 people, ranging from Jake's elderly grandmother to his cousin's newborn baby. The backyard filled with the sounds of multiple conversations, kids playing, and classic rock streaming from someone's Bluetooth speaker. It was exactly the kind of warm, chaotic family gathering that Patricia lived for. I helped serve dinner, playing the perfect girlfriend role while internally counting down to showtime. Patricia had already mentioned the slideshow multiple times, reminding everyone to stick around after dessert for the photo presentation. She'd been working on it all week, she said, and had some really special pictures to share with everyone. She had no fucking idea how special they were going to be. During dinner, I sat at the same picnic table I'd occupied at every previous barbecue, right between Jake and his cousin Sarah. Jake kept trying to make normal conversation, asking about my job and making jokes like everything was fine between us. His performance was actually pretty convincing. If I hadn't caught him cheating, I might have believed he was just being his usual charming self, but I could see the cracks in his facade. The way his hand shook slightly when he reached for his beer. The way he kept glancing at me when he thought I wasn't looking, trying to read my expression for hints about what I might be planning. The way he flinched every time someone mentioned cameras or photos. His grandmother, bless her heart, kept asking when we were going to get married, telling everyone within earshot that Jake had found himself a keeper and better not let me get away. Patricia chimed in with stories about how helpful I'd been in the kitchen, how much she enjoyed having another woman around for the family gatherings. Even Jake's dad made a comment about how I was good for his son, how Jake seemed happier and more settled since we'd been together. Each compliment felt like a knife twisting in my chest. These people genuinely cared about me, had welcomed me into their family, and I was about to shatter their illusions about their beloved Jake in the most public, humiliating way possible. The guilt tried to creep in again, but then I'd look at Jake and remember his laugh when he was caught cheating, and my resolve would strengthen. They deserved to know the truth. I was just the messenger. After dessert, Patricia started setting up the projector while people cleared dishes and refilled drinks. The sun was starting to set, creating the perfect lighting for an outdoor movie screening. She'd done this dozens of times before, had the whole process down to a science. Someone would dim the string lights, kids would grab blankets and sit on the grass, adults would pull their chairs into a semicircle facing the makeshift screen she'd hung between two trees. My laptop bag sat innocuously beside my chair, looking like any other personal item someone might bring to a family gathering. Inside was Patricia's laptop, which I'd volunteered to help her set up earlier in the day. She'd been so grateful for the assistance, especially when I offered to organize all the photos people had sent her throughout the week. I'd been very thorough in my organization. Patricia called for everyone's attention, her voice carrying that special excitement she always got when she was about to share family memories with everyone. She started with her usual speech about how important these gatherings were, how family was everything, how grateful she was that everyone could come together to celebrate their love for each other. The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. She introduced the slideshow as a journey through the past few months, featuring highlights from birthdays, graduations, vacations, and everyday moments that captured the joy of being part of such a close-knit family. She'd organized everything chronologically, she said, so people could see how much everyone had grown and changed since the last barbecue. The presentation started innocently enough. Photos from Jake's cousin's graduation, his uncle's fishing trip, a family birthday party I'd attended just last month. Everyone laughed and commented as the familiar faces appeared on screen, sharing stories about the moments captured in each image. I sat perfectly still, maintaining the same pleasant expression I'd worn all day while my heart hammered against my ribs. Jake was sitting close enough that I could feel the tension radiating from his body, but he was still trying to play it cool, still probably thinking the worst that could happen was some awkward questions about our relationship status. Sweet, naive Jake. The first photo in my special sequence appeared about 10 minutes into the presentation. It was subtle, just Melissa at a restaurant, smiling at the camera while someone clearly sat across from her at the table. You could see a man's hand holding a beer, and on his wrist was a very distinctive watch. Jake's watch. The one I'd given him with my name engraved on the back. I watched Patricia's face as she processed the image. Her smile faltered slightly, confusion flickering across her features. She probably recognized the watch but couldn't quite place why it seemed important. A few other people in the audience made appreciative comments about the restaurant, asking where it was located, whether the food was good. Jake had gone completely rigid beside me. He knew exactly what he was looking at, knew that if I had this photo, I probably had others. I could practically hear his mind racing, trying to figure out how to minimize the damage that was about to unfold. The second photo appeared a few slides later. This one showed Melissa at a hotel bar, clearly dressed for a romantic evening, with someone's arm draped casually around her shoulders. You could see part of Jake's distinctive forearm tattoo, the one he'd gotten to commemorate his grandfather's death. The same tattoo I'd kissed hundreds of times, traced with my fingers during quiet morning moments when I thought we were building something real together. Patricia's confusion was deepening. She kept glancing between the screen and Jake, clearly recognizing elements of the photos but not quite ready to accept what she was seeing. Other family members were starting to murmur among themselves, pointing out details they recognized, asking questions about who was in the pictures. Jake was sweating now, his face pale and his hands clenched into fists on his knees. He kept shooting desperate looks in my direction, probably hoping I'd somehow intervene and end the slideshow before things got worse. But I was perfectly calm, perfectly still, watching his world crumble one photograph at a time. The third photo was the money shot. Melissa and Jake together at the coast, clearly on the weekend trip he'd told me was a work conference. They were kissing on the beach at sunset, his hands tangled in her hair, her body pressed against his in a way that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. The timestamp on the photo matched exactly with the dates Jake had supposedly been attending professional development sessions. The silence in the backyard was deafening. Patricia's face had gone from confusion to recognition to horror in the span of about 3 seconds. Other family members were starting to understand what they were looking at, voices rising as people demanded explanations, asked who was in the photos, wondered why pictures of Jake with another woman were in the family slideshow. Jake shot to his feet like he'd been electrocuted, his chair falling backward with a crash that made several people jump. He was stammering something about the photos being fake, about this being some kind of misunderstanding, but his voice was shaking so badly that no one could take his denials seriously. Patricia was staring at the screen like she couldn't believe what she was seeing, her hand pressed to her chest as if she was having trouble breathing. She kept looking between Jake and the photo, probably hoping one of them would suddenly make sense, that there would be some reasonable explanation for why her son was kissing another woman while supposedly in a committed relationship. The fourth photo appeared automatically, the slideshow continuing its inexorable march toward complete revelation. This one showed Jake and Melissa in what was clearly a hotel room, both partially dressed, looking at each other with the kind of intimacy that only comes from a sustained relationship. The timestamp showed it was taken just 5 days ago, 3 days after I'd caught them in my own bed. That's when Jake completely lost it. He lunged toward the laptop, probably planning to shut down the presentation before more evidence could appear. But his cousin Mike, who'd been sitting closer to the projector, caught his arm and demanded to know what the fuck was going on, why Jake was trying to stop the slideshow, what those photos meant. Jake's explanation was a masterpiece of panic and poor decision-making. He started by insisting the photos were doctored, that someone was trying to frame him or make him look bad. When that didn't work, he switched to claiming that Melissa was just a friend, that the photos were taken out of context and didn't show what people thought they showed. But then the fifth photo appeared, and any hope Jake had of talking his way out of the situation evaporated completely. This one was a screenshot from Melissa's social media, showing her checking in at a romantic restaurant with the caption, "Perfect date night with my secret love," and tagged with Jake's location at a time when he'd told me he was working late on a construction project. The explosion of outrage from Jake's family was immediate and volcanic. His dad's face turned red with anger and embarrassment. His sister Rebecca, who'd been cheated on by her own husband, started yelling about what a piece of shit Jake was, how he'd fooled everyone into thinking he was a decent man. His cousins were demanding explanations. His aunts were clutching their pearls and asking how long this had been going on. But it was Patricia's reaction that hit me the hardest. She wasn't yelling or demanding answers like the others. She was just sitting there, tears streaming down her face, staring at her son like she'd never seen him before. The woman who'd spent 2 years treating me like a daughter, who'd talked excitedly about grandchildren and holiday traditions, was watching her perfect family image crumble in real time. Jake was in full panic mode now, abandoning any attempt at explanation and instead trying to shift blame. He started yelling about how I was crazy, how I'd set this whole thing up to make him look bad, how the photos were probably fake or manipulated. He even had the audacity to suggest that I'd cheated first and was trying to make him look like the bad guy to cover my own guilt. That's when I finally spoke up. Not yelling, not crying, just speaking clearly and calmly, while 30 pairs of eyes focused on me like I was about to deliver the most important testimony of my life. I told them about coming home sick from work and finding Jake in our bed with Melissa. I described his reaction. Not embarrassment or guilt or remorse, but genuine amusement. How he'd looked me in the eye and laughed like my pain was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. How he'd acted like I was being dramatic for being upset about catching him cheating. The backyard was dead silent except for the sound of Patricia crying and Jake's increasingly desperate attempts to control the narrative. I explained how I'd spent weeks putting together the evidence, how every photo in the slideshow was real and verifiable, how Jake had been living a double life for months while making plans for our future together. Then I played my final card. I pulled out my phone and showed them the text messages Jake had sent me over the past week. Messages where he admitted to the affair, begged me not to tell his family, promised he'd end things with Melissa if I just kept quiet about what I'd discovered. Written confession, delivered by the cheater himself. Jake's last-ditch effort to save face was trying to make me look vindictive and cruel. He told his family that yes, he'd made a mistake, but that I was being psychotic by humiliating him in front of everyone instead of handling things privately like adults. He tried to paint himself as the victim of a woman scorned, someone who'd made an error in judgment but didn't deserve public humiliation. That's when his sister Rebecca stepped in. She looked Jake dead in the eye and told him that if he thought cheating was just a mistake, he was even more of a piece of shit than her ex-husband. She said that Amanda, me, had every right to expose him however she wanted, that actions have consequences, and that maybe if he'd thought about his family's feelings before he started fucking around, he wouldn't be in this situation. The support from Rebecca felt like vindication. Here was someone who understood betrayal, who knew exactly what I'd been through, and she was on my side. Other family members started chiming in with their own opinions, and none of them were sympathetic to Jake's position. His dad, who'd been silent during most of the chaos, finally spoke up. He said he was ashamed to call Jake his son, that he'd raised him better than this, that cheating on someone who loved you and then laughing about their pain was the behavior of a coward and a bully. Patricia, through her tears, asked me if I was okay, if there was anything she could do to help me through this difficult time. The kindness in her voice after learning what her son had done to me was almost too much to handle. I told her I was fine, that I just wanted everyone to know the truth about who Jake really was. Jake made one final attempt to salvage the situation by storming toward me, probably planning to physically remove me from his family's property. But his cousins and uncle intercepted him, making it clear that if anyone was leaving, it would be him. They told him to get his shit together and get out, that he wasn't welcome at family gatherings until he figured out how to act like a decent human being. Watching Jake being rejected by his own family, seeing him reduced from golden child to family pariah in the span of 30 minutes, was the most satisfying thing I'd ever experienced. This was the man who'd laughed at my pain, who'd thought my heartbreak was amusing entertainment. Now he was the one being humiliated, the one facing consequences for his actions, the one learning that betrayal has a price. As Jake gathered his things and prepared to leave in disgrace, he shot me one last look. Not amusement this time, but pure hatred. The mask was completely off now. No more charm, no more manipulation, just raw anger at being exposed for who he really was. He probably expected me to feel guilty or ashamed for ruining his family relationships. Instead, I smiled. A genuine, satisfied smile that let him know I'd enjoyed every second of watching his world burn. Because karma isn't just a bitch. Sometimes she's a woman with a laptop full of evidence and a family barbecue full of witnesses. And sometimes she cries laughing while revealing the truth to people who deserve to know it. After Jake's dramatic exit, and I mean dramatic, he literally peeled out of the driveway like he was in some kind of action movie, the backyard fell into this weird, stunned silence. 30 people trying to process what they'd just witnessed, trying to reconcile the Jake they thought they knew with the cheating asshole who'd just been exposed in high-definition detail. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever, but was probably only about 10 seconds before Patricia started apologizing to me. This sweet woman, whose son had just been revealed as a lying piece of shit, was apologizing to me for his behavior. She kept saying she was sorry, that she'd raised him better than this, that she couldn't believe he'd treated me so badly. The guilt I'd been pushing down all week came rushing back, seeing her tear-stained face and knowing I was responsible for destroying her illusions about her golden child. But then Rebecca put her arm around my shoulders and told me I was a fucking hero for exposing Jake before he could hurt anyone else. She said watching him get his comeuppance was the most satisfying thing she'd seen since her own ex-husband got served with divorce papers. The rest of the family started chiming in with support, telling me I'd done the right thing, that Jake deserved everything he got and more. His cousin Mike said he'd always thought something was off about Jake lately, how he'd been acting sketchy and secretive. His Aunt Linda mentioned that she'd seen him at restaurants around town with a blonde woman but assumed it was work-related. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who'd noticed changes in Jake's behavior. I was just the only one who'd connected the dots and done something about it. Patricia spent the next hour asking me questions about the timeline, trying to understand how long the affair had been going on, whether there had been signs she'd missed. I walked her through everything I'd discovered, showing her the social media evidence, the timeline of lies Jake had told both of us. She listened with this heartbreaking combination of fascination and horror, like she was trying to memorize every detail so she could understand how her son had become someone she didn't recognize. The conversation was therapeutic in a way I hadn't expected. Talking through the betrayal with people who were genuinely outraged on my behalf helped me process emotions I'd been burying under the planning and revenge plotting. These people cared about me, had considered me family, and they were just as hurt by Jake's actions as I was. Their support validated everything I'd been feeling, confirmed that I wasn't crazy or overreacting or vindictive. I was a woman who'd been betrayed and had every right to expose that betrayal. Around 9 o'clock, people started heading home, but not before making sure I was okay, exchanging phone numbers, promising to stay in touch. Patricia hugged me for a solid minute, whispering that I would always be welcome in their home, that Jake's actions didn't change how they felt about me. Rebecca invited me to lunch the following week, said she wanted to share war stories about dealing with cheating assholes and moving on with life. Even Jake's dad, who wasn't much for emotional conversations, pulled me aside to say he was proud of how I'd handled the situation, that I'd shown more class and strength than his son ever had. The drive home was surreal. I kept replaying the evening in my head, remembering the look on Jake's face when each photo appeared, the moment when his family turned against him, the satisfaction of watching him scramble for excuses that nobody believed. The revenge had been even more perfect than I'd imagined. Not just because Jake had been exposed and humiliated, but because he'd lost the respect and support of the people who mattered most to him. His family's rejection would sting far longer than any public embarrassment. Over the next few days, the aftermath continued to unfold in ways I hadn't anticipated. Patricia texted me updates about family members' reactions, how Jake's grandmother was disappointed beyond words, how his other cousins were sharing their own stories about times Jake had acted suspicious or dishonest. Apparently, my revelation had opened floodgates of people admitting they'd had doubts about Jake's character for years. Rebecca and I did meet for lunch, and it turned into a 3-hour therapy session disguised as girl talk. She told me about her own experience with infidelity, how devastating it had been to discover her husband's affair, how she'd wished she'd had the courage to expose him the way I'd exposed Jake. She said watching Jake get his comeuppance had given her a vicarious sense of justice for her own situation. Hearing her perspective helped me understand that what I'd done wasn't just about personal revenge, it was about accountability, about refusing to let someone's bad behavior go unpunished just because it was easier or more socially acceptable to handle things quietly. The best part was learning about Jake's continued downward spiral through the family gossip network. Apparently, he'd tried to reconcile with Melissa after the barbecue disaster, but she'd dumped him when she realized he'd been publicly exposed and his family had disowned him. She'd been in the relationship for the excitement of being someone's secret, but having it all come out in such a humiliating way had destroyed whatever appeal the affair had held for her. Jake had lost both relationships and gained a reputation as an untrustworthy cheater. His construction crew found out about the situation, small town, word travels fast, and his boss had apparently made some comments about not being able to trust someone who'd lie to the person closest to them. The professional consequences weren't something I'd planned for, but they felt like bonus karma points. A month later, I was genuinely happy for the first time since before I'd caught Jake cheating. Not the artificial happiness that comes from seeing your ex suffer, but real contentment with my own life and choices. The revenge had given me closure in a way that simply walking away never could have. I'd taken control of a situation where I'd been powerless, turned Jake's casual cruelty back on him in the most poetic way possible. But more importantly, I'd learned something about myself in the process. I wasn't the kind of person who would suffer in silence or take the high road when someone had treated me like garbage. I was the kind of person who would methodically document evidence, plan strategic revenge, and execute it flawlessly while maintaining plausible deniability. That knowledge felt empowering in ways I was still discovering. The guilt about involving Jake's family had faded completely. Patricia and I still texted regularly, and she'd made it clear that knowing the truth about Jake's character was better than living with illusions. She'd told me that my revelation had actually brought the family closer together, that they'd spent weeks talking about values and honesty, and the importance of treating people with respect. In a weird way, exposing Jake had made his family stronger and more authentic with each other. 6 months later, I ran into Jake at a grocery store. He looked like shit, thinner, pale, with dark circles under his eyes that suggested he wasn't sleeping well. When he saw me, he actually tried to approach, probably planning to attempt some kind of reconciliation or closure conversation. I just looked at him and started laughing. Not mean laughter, not vindictive or cruel, just genuine amusement at the sight of the man who'd once found my pain so entertaining. The irony was perfect. He'd laughed when I was devastated, and now I was laughing while he was clearly miserable. He stopped walking toward me, and I could see in his face that he understood the role reversal. The casual cruelty he'd shown me had come back to destroy his life in ways he never could have anticipated. I finished my shopping and left him standing there in the produce section, probably wondering how someone he'd dismissed so easily had managed to orchestrate his complete downfall. That night, I called Rebecca and told her about the grocery store encounter. We both laughed until we cried, celebrating the fact that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe delivers exactly the justice you need. Because here's what I learned from the whole experience. When someone shows you who they really are through their cruelty, believe them. And when they laugh at your pain like it's entertainment, remember that comedy is all about timing, and eventually it'll be your turn to deliver the punchline. Jake thought my heartbreak was hilarious? Well, I had the last laugh, and it was absolutely fucking beautiful.